Hi, my name is Caroline Manny and I'm a librarian here at Midway University, and your instructor has asked me to create a video about writing a literature review for your class because that is going to be one of your class projects. So let's get started. Before we talk about writing a literature review specifically, in order to make it more understandable, we need to talk for a minute about the research process in general. So, what is the research process? When you're writing an academic research paper, first you choose a topic that is generally interesting to you. That may be interesting either because you have become curious about the topic through other readings or through other courses, or it might be something that's personally interesting to you. So, like for example, in my case, my mother is currently struggling with a diagnosis with Alzheimer's disease, so that topic is personally interesting to me. So maybe that is the topic that I have chosen as my overall interesting topic. Next, you need to do some exploratory research because obviously, in the case of my topic, Alzheimer's disease is something that entire encyclopedias can be written about. That's not a paper topic, it's way too broad. So I need to do some exploratory research and narrow it down a little bit. I need to talk a little bit about how that exploratory research works because that exploratory research becomes your literature review. So, how does the exploratory research work? To do my exploratory research, I would go over to the library's webpage and I might go to the Healthcare Administration Research Guide and go to Articles and choose a database. Or I could just start my exploratory research in this search bar. I type in my topic in the search bar and I can start narrowing down my subjects either by clicking over here on subject and seeing some of the subjects that are suggested, or just by looking at the article titles. So when I look at the titles of the articles, I see things like long-term care insurance with Alzheimer's patients, home care with Alzheimer's patients, Medicare and Alzheimer's patients, the diagnostic process in Alzheimer's patients. And as I go through the articles, I'll see more and more topics. Looking at the different topics, I'll start seeing ones that interest me. So, for example, I'm interested in how I'm going to pay for my mom's care. So maybe I would type in Medicare and Alzheimer's patients and narrow it down a little bit and start looking at those articles. At this point, I'm getting really close to my fully narrowed down, refined topic. So as I start reading these articles that are leading me to my actual research question, and I'll talk more about that term in a second, I need to start taking careful notes. I maybe even might want to create what's called an annotated bibliography. An annotated bibliography is where you write down the citation of an article, just like you would in APA style, and then a brief summary of all the important points in the article. And I want to do that for every one of the articles that I read. Whether or not I think it's actually going to make it into the paper, it's still helping me form my research topic. So I need to keep a careful record of all the research that I've done. I highly recommend that at this stage you do that on note cards, because later on then you'll be able to take those note cards and organize them in the order that they're going to appear in your literature review, and that's going to be really helpful. So let's go back to the research process and the structure of an academic paper. At this point, you're doing your exploratory research and you're identifying some important controversies on your topic, or possibly some potential errors from your point of view in the way that the topic has been analyzed or approached in the past, or maybe you're identifying gaps in information in the current research, something that needs to be explored further, a question that hasn't been addressed yet. Those controversies or potential errors or gaps in information are going to become your paper. Because remember, when you're writing an academic paper, your goal isn't to summarize what's been done in the past. Your goal is to look at been done in the past and decide how you can contribute a new idea, a new interpretation, how you can fill in a gap in information or correct a past error or address a current controversy. So that's what you're doing when you're doing your exploratory research and you're keeping those note cards of everything that you've read. The note cards are going to talk about the controversies in the articles that you're reading, the errors in the articles, or the gap in information. Okay. So once you've done that exploratory research, at some point you are going to realize what your research question is. You're going to be able to formulate your research question. So what is an example of a research question? In my case, sticking still with the topic of Medicare and Alzheimer's patients, maybe my research question would be something along the lines of, can hospitals provide better care to Alzheimer's patients if they help the patient's family navigate the Medicare process? If that's my research question, then my hypothesis might be something like, training nurses to help patients' families navigate the Medicare process will lead to better patient care. And I might have a secondary hypothesis that says training a financial aid officer to help families navigate the Medicare process will lead to better patient care. And I might have additional hypothesis for different people who might be appropriate to help families navigate that process. So those will be my hypotheses that I'm going to test in my research. Now I am finally ready to write the literature review. So what is that literature review going to be? To answer that question, I'm going to take you back to the library's webpage, and we're going to click on the research guides link up here at the top, and that's going to take us to this list of research guides. And I'm going to scroll down to the bottom to the topic guides, and I'm going to click on the How to Write a Literature Review research guide. In this research guide, we're going to explore what is a literature review and how to write it. Going to the first link here on the research guide, what is a literature review? Honestly, we've already answered that question. The literature review is all of that exploratory research that we've been talking about. It's all of the research that you've done, that you've taken notes on those note cards. What you're going to be doing with your literature review is you're going to be summarizing the research that you did that led you to your research question and your hypothesis. So you're going to synthesize and summarize all of the articles that you read and place them in the context of how they led you to your research question. If I click on this link, what type of literature review should I write and how should I organize it? This page of the research guide talks a little bit about how literature reviews can be organized. There are basically three types of literature reviews that you can write: historical, thematic, or methodological. Most people write a historical review. What does that mean? That means that you are looking at the articles that you read that led you to your research question kind of in the historical order of how the research has been done. So you're showing the historical process of how the situation on your topic has changed from previous years and what's led up to the current situation, and then you will go on to talk about the need for change that you see, the controversy or the error in the way that things are being done now, or the gap in information that leads to the change that you're proposing, and you'll talk about how that is now needed. That would be a historical review where you talk about how we went from the past to your current proposed change. Other types of literature reviews are thematic reviews, and there are a variety of different types there. Two of the most common thematic literature review types are the argumentative review and the theoretical review. In the argumentative review, that's most appropriate when you are claiming that the research up to date has had some errors in interpretation, and so you state what the previous research said, and then you explain how you see that as an error of interpretation. In the theoretical review, that's most appropriate when you are examining the controversies that have occurred in previous research so that you can show the different articles and the different sides of the controversy and examine the relationships between those existing theories or approaches, and then come to the point where you are proposing your resolution or your new side to the controversy, whatever it is that your paper is going to contribute. A last type of literature review that's less common but still can be seen is the methodological review. In that case, you're not necessarily focusing on what previous research has done, but on how the previous research was done. So in other words, you're not necessarily focusing on the conclusions that were drawn, but rather you're criticizing the errors or gaps in the way the research was done. You might say that there were errors in the previous research's sample. For example, you might say that they didn't sample the African American community, or they didn't sample a wide variety of ages, and therefore their research conclusions are invalid and your research is going to sample those communities. That's just one example. So your literature review would focus on the methodology of the previous research instead of what it said. Now, an important thing to remember, by talking about historical reviews and thematic reviews and methodological reviews, I'm not trying to give you a formula that you follow to write your literature review. You're not going to be able to Google historical literature review and find any type of specific formulaic layout to write your literature review. Each literature review is unique, and it depends on the research question that you have finally come to and the previous research that's been done. And the goal of the literature review, once again, is to take all of that previous research that you read, summarize it and synthesize it so that you can explain the background of the previous research, show where the gaps were in that research, and therefore what you can contribute to the previous research that's a new idea. And whatever way that you need to summarize the research that you read to get that point across, that's a perfectly good way to do it. One of the things that I always suggest to students when they're trying to write their first literature review, you can find here on What Should I Do Before Starting My Literature Review. That's point 4 here, find models. Look at other literature reviews in your area or your discipline and read them to get a sense of how a literature review works in your field. How are you going to do that? Well, frankly, all of that exploratory research that you did, all of those articles that you read, have a literature review in them, whether you're aware of it or not. Each one of those articles, right after the introductory paragraph, discusses in some way the previous research that led to the research that this article did. So look at how those have, be aware, be conscious as you're reading the articles that you're reading for your paper. Be conscious of how those papers, how those articles present their literature review, and think about how they did it and how you might apply those same techniques. You'll get an idea of what literature reviews look like in your particular field or for the particular topic that you are writing about. And my last piece of advice you can find on this tab. What should I be aware of while writing the literature review? When you're writing a literature review, you are summarizing what you have read. You're summarizing other people's research, other people's articles. So we have to worry about citations, quotes, paraphrasing, and summaries. You have to be aware of how you're going to cite the articles that you read, how you're going to cite the previous research in order to avoid plagiarism. So when you're writing a literature review, the first tip is definitely use evidence. You definitely are going to have to refer to the previous research, to the other articles that you read. But you want to use quotes sparingly. Only use direct quotes from the other research papers when the way that the article, the original article, has phrased the topic just simply cannot be rewritten in your own words. In other words, the original article coined certain phrases or terms that are unique and have to continue to be used in your study, so you need to be able to quote them. That's just an example of when using an actual quote might be important. Most of your literature review is going to be a summary or a synthesis of the articles that you've read. And there's an example right here that you can look at of how those types of summaries happen. And I'd like to show you another research guide that talks more about using quotes, summaries, and paraphrasing properly. Going back to the list of research guides, if you go to the research guide and click on using and citing information, you'll see that there is an entire page on when to quote, when to summarize, and when to paraphrase. This would probably be a very useful resource for you when you finally get down to the stage of writing your literature review. Okay, let me just make a quick summary for you guys. First point, don't look at your research, don't look at this literature review as finding the fewest articles possible to support a topic that you've already decided on. Don't start with your idea and look for things to support it. Instead, look at this literature review, look at this research as an opportunity to explore a topic that interests you and let your reading lead you to a conclusion. The conclusion comes last after what you read. Second, as you do that exploratory research, keep good notes. Those notes are going to turn into your literature review. Third, when choosing which articles to put into your literature review, choose the ones that led you to the research question that you settled on. And fourth, when writing your literature review, summarize the necessary articles showing how they led you to your conclusion and to your fresh idea. The literature review puts the research that you did It shows the previous research in the context of your fresh idea. I hope this helps. Remember, if you have any questions when you're writing your literature review or you're having any trouble doing your research, you can always contact the library at library@midway.edu. Thanks.